A heavy silence descended over the grand marble atrium of Palais d'Ossam, the kind of silence that arrives not with peace, but with foreboding. All eyes were fixed on the woman gliding toward the ceremonial dais, a striking vision of grace and mystery. Draped in layered silk the color of twilight and adorned with gold filigree that whispered of ancient royalty, she seemed to materialize from the folds of myth. Her beauty was not merely physical but commanding, sculpted with the authority of queens and the calm of assassins. They called her Queen Amina, an African monarch of Zulu Bantu descent, or so she claimed. But beneath the elegance, beneath the carefully curated tale of royal lineage stretching back to the Congo Basin, shadows trailed her steps. President Ibrahim Traore, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, stood stoic but alert. As she approached, and presented him with an ornate, jewel-encrusted gift box, a piece of craftsmanship fit for emperors, his usually unflinching gaze momentarily softened. In that fleeting breath between ceremony and silence, he felt a ripple of something rare. Not affection, not even desire, but recognition. Her words, spoken like a lullaby wrapped in diplomacy, evoked Sankara's vision, Pan-Africanism, and the burial of colonial ghosts. His heart stirred. Was it respect or a trap dressed in reverence? As applause thundered through the corridors of power, marble walls echoed with more than claps. They carried whispers, whispers that this queen, this silken enigma, might not be who she claimed. That she had not come to unite, but to unravel. That the very hands that offered him a gift could be the ones holding the dagger fated for his back. Rain began to fall softly over Ouagadougou, the droplets mingling with the distant drums that beat through the capital, a rhythmic mourning and celebration all at once. Later that day, at the towering Sankara mausoleum, carved from jet-black granite and veined with veins of red quartz, the president delivered a rousing tribute to sacrifice and sovereignty. The plaza was lined with dignitaries and veterans, but the crowd only turned truly silent when she arrived. She glided through the mist as though born from it, her golden-laced ankara swaying with each step, a headdress sculpted like a phoenix's crown atop her braided hair. She called herself a daughter of the warrior queens, a bearer of legacy. Her voice, a soothing melody shaded with command, pierced the veil of suspicion, painting a portrait of African unity reborn. Ministers exchanged wary glances, some seduced by her charisma, others recoiling from the unknown. But Traoré, whose heart had seen betrayal and brotherhood alike, silenced them with a single nod. That night, she dined in the presidential residence. As dusk painted the city in tones of bronze and violet, the two walked side by side through the Sankara Museum. Her words were fire, stories of revolution, of purging Western puppets, of youth, armed with ideas instead of weapons. Her passion mirrored his own so perfectly that he began to wonder if fate had crafted her from his very ribs. Yet behind her gaze lay something unreadable. She paused before a bronze bust of Sankara, whispered something in Arabic no one could decipher, and she lingered, not in reverence, but in calculation. The next day, she was granted limited access to cultural documents under the guise of exchange, though her eyes flickered toward deeper files, thicker vaults. And in the silence of his chamber that evening, Traoré stared out the window at the glowing skyline, unsure if he had just embraced his greatest ally, or unknowingly welcomed the instrument of his own undoing. She had a name before Amina, long before she wore silk or spoke of Sankara. Back then, she was Zara. Her past was scorched into her bones. As a child, she watched a drone rain death upon her village, vaporizing her parents in an unmarked raid never acknowledged by any government. Barefoot, she walked from blood-soaked, soiled to Timbuktu, where her grief hardened into purpose. There, hidden beneath the dusty libraries and mosques, she was found, recruited by a shadow sect of Jama'at Nasr al-Islam wal-Muslimin. She learned languages like weapons, Arabic, French, Hausa. She mastered infiltration, persuasion, psychological warfare, and then she was remade, not as a soldier but as a scalpel. Zara became a phantom of insurgency. She toppled governors with whispers, seduced warlords into surrender, and poisoned ideologies like wine. Her mission? Assassinate the boy president who dared defy France. Ibrahim Traore, the unbending symbol of resistance, had rattled too many colonial cages. He had to be extinguished, not by bombs but by belief. Zara would become the myth he believed in. Inside the halls of power her story held. Ministers debated her past. No record of her kingdom, muttered General Koulibaly, his war-scarred face tense. We're handing her the keys to the revolution. But a younger advisor, eyes clouded with admiration, replied, She speaks our truth. She could be the voice that unites Africa. Traoré heard both. Yet he said nothing. Outside, Zara stood beneath the flag of Burkina Faso, watching it flutter against the rising wind. The closer she drew to Traoré, the louder the ghost of her childhood whispered, Burn it all. Even the dreamers. But something in her quivered now. At the Ministry of Security, a sealed basement room hummed with electricity. The VDP had intercepted coded transmissions, encrypted signals bouncing from the palace to the gossy desert fringe. The codes were primitive, almost mocking, but their origin chilled the room. The frequency came from a palace channel, dormant for months, now active again. The name embedded in the cipher, Zara al-Mujahida. President Traoré sat in his war room, shadows dancing on his tired face. Before him lay a photograph, Zara beside him at the mausoleum, radiant in gold. She quoted Frantz Fanon at breakfast. She read Sankara's journals by candlelight. She touched his wounded soul, but facts do not lie. Surveillance revealed she vanished from their grid for 17 minutes. Her guest quarters housed an unregistered device, now gone. The decoded messages spoke of a lion becoming tame, of a crown destined to fall. He summoned no guards, not yet. That evening he watched her from the shadows as she addressed youth leaders in the courtyard. Her hands painted hope. Her voice flowed like a river hymn. To believe her was to save the dream. To doubt her might save his life. Later, in the garden by the great baobab tree, she found him alone. The night was still, save for the distant rumble of thunder. You look tired, Ibrahim, she said gently. He didn't respond. Then finally, voice, hollow. If I'm wrong, I lose an ally. If I'm right, I've already invited death into my home. He turned to her. Who are you? Really? She smiled, not with menace, but with sorrow. The one who understands you. At 2:14 a.m., the night sky over Ouagadougou split with fire. A silent drone, small as a hawk, streaked past the Koudougou outpost and exploded in a flash that shook the horizon. The war had already begun, and it had started inside his heart. The thick scent of diesel and scorched earth clung to the air as President Ibrahim Traore stepped onto the rugged grounds of the Dory Gold refinery. The facility, hidden deep in Burkina Faso's arid outskirts, glowed faintly under the cloak of dust and smoke, its industrial heart beating slow and hollow like a dying beast. Official reports stated the site was under tight military control, but in truth it had become the silent epicenter of an invisible war, one waged not with armies but with whispers, betrayals, and shadows. A manila folder, its corners worn and edges stained with sweat, had found its way into Traoré's hands just hours before. It was delivered by a man who once swore loyalty to the African queen, now stripped of rank and filled with remorse. What it contained had led Traoré here. What it revealed would unearth a truth more dangerous than the drones, more precise than the missile strikes. He descended into the depths of the refinery, past rusted ladders, echoing grates, and locked steel doors that groaned open with resistance. Deep underground, hidden behind camouflaged barriers and disguised as an inactive fuel storage bay, his men uncovered a cache unlike any seen before. It wasn't just equipment, it was evidence of treason, of subterfuge built from within. Stacked. Neatly in crates were encrypted radios, military-grade surveillance tools, and unregistered SIM cards, each one linked to intercepted transmissions the VDP had traced for weeks. Scattered across the concrete floor were maps of Burkina Faso's vital arteries, marked supply lines running through porous borders into Benin, pulsing like veins feeding a larger hidden organism. Notes were scrawled in Arabic on the walls, code names, targets, encrypted coordinates, all aligning with audio logs of subversive activity previously dismissed as disinformation. But what shattered the last of Traoré's doubts was a single, faded photograph pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. It showed Zara, not in her usual graceful attire, not wrapped in the elegance of diplomacy, but clad in worn fatigues, a rifle slung over her shoulder. Her smile was unguarded, radiant, almost maternal. In her arms, a small child nestled against her chest, no older than 5. A child who, in that image, seemed to humanize the woman who had betrayed a nation. Traoré's eyes locked on the photograph, his breath stilled by the weight of memory and revelation. He whispered under his breath, the words thick with grief and fury. She was operating a full insurgent cell from inside my own government. Beside him stood Commander Diallo, a battle-hardened veteran who had lost men in Ouagadougou and seen the cost of war up close. His face was carved from granite, his stare unflinching. "She made her choice," he spat into the dust. "We end her now. No speeches, no mercy." But Traoré didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the photograph, as though trying to see past the image and into the heart of the woman he once trusted, perhaps even admired. Had every moment been a lie? Every tear, every confession, every trembling word under moonlight? Or was she something more dangerous than a traitor? Someone who believed her betrayal was just. His fists clenched, jaw tightening as rage battled with sorrow. He had built this revolution with blood and sacrifice, brick by brick, dream by dream. And now, from within the palace walls, it had been hollowed by someone who had claimed to fight for the same freedom. Outside, above the refinery's iron roof, the winds of the Sahel blew hot and dry, scattering ash and secrets into the darkening sky. Below, in the cold belly of a nation betrayed, President Ibrahim Traore stood before the remnants of deception and realized that the next war would not be won with weapons alone. It would be won by deciding whether to destroy the enemy or understand why they believed they were right. Was the boy leverage or the reason? Later that night, alone inside his command tent pitched near Dori's perimeter, President Ibrahim Traore sat motionless beneath a flickering oil lamp. The wind outside whispered through the Sahel like a ghost of old betrayals. He stared down at the photograph again, the image that refused to leave him, her face, the boy. Truth layered over deceit like sand covering ancient bones. She had warned him about her past, yes, but warnings were words. This was evidence, concrete, undeniable. She hadn't just played the game, she had designed the board. And yet those confessions, those tearful admissions, the trembling voice that echoed in the palace corridor, they hadn't seemed false. Not entirely. He remembered the hesitation in her eyes, the human flicker beneath the trained facade. Could both realities exist? Could she be a traitor and still be sincere? Two truths collided inside his chest like opposing storm fronts. To protect the nation, he would have to destroy the traitor. But to do so would mean silencing the only person who had ever looked at his uprising not as a grasp for power, but as redemption. Was she his deadliest enemy, or his ultimate test? As dawn crept over the dunes, the desert howled like a wounded god. In the distance, armored vehicles sliced across the horizon, their engines growling, wheels churning up clouds. Of dust like smoke before war, atop the lead truck, stood Traoré, gripping the rail, his eyes hard as iron, locked onto a dot far ahead, a fleeing black SUV. The Queen was running. Satellite intel had pinged her escape just minutes after she vanished from her quarters. A daring maneuver, slipping through centuries-old tunnels beneath the palace, aided by rebel operatives hidden in his own administration. Her destination, a forgotten smuggler's path near Marcoy, where the jihadist group JNIM reportedly waited to extract her. But Traoré wasn't interested in diplomacy. He wasn't sending drones or negotiations. He was coming himself. As the convoy gained, her SUV swerved, crashing into the dry bowl of a ravine. Dust settled like ash. Soldiers poured out, rifles raised, forming a circle around the trapped vehicle. One shouted, "Out!" The doors creaked open. She emerged. Zara, her white robes stained with sweat and sand. But she wasn't alone. Clutched tightly to her side was a boy, the same boy from the photo, his face buried in her robes, limbs shaking, eyes wide and terrified. She wrapped a protective arm around him like a human shield. "You fire," she said, voice cracking. "And he dies with me." Traoré stepped forward slowly, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You would use your own son as cover? I didn't bring him into this," she spat, raw emotion flashing across her face. "They did. You did. You left me no choice." Silence rippled across the standoff. His soldiers' fingers twitched against their triggers. Dust swirled like spirits, rising. Every option in Traoré's mind was weighted with consequence. One wrong move and the powder keg would ignite. "Let the boy go," he said at last, his voice low but firm. "You want me? Take me. But let him walk." She stared at him, conflicted, torn between revenge and surrender, between a mother's love and a soldier's defiance. The boy looked up at her, his face streaked with tears and dust. For a second, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Would she choose mercy or martyrdom? At the scorched edge of Burkina Faso's border, the Queen stood ringed by the president's men. The sun above burned like judgment. Behind her, jagged cliffs marked the Sahel's edge. Before her, 24 rifles pointed with military precision. Her white robes clung like skin, stained and shaking. The boy clung to her hip. Around them, the world was silent. Traoré stepped forward again, the Burkina flag fluttering above. "Him. This isn't war," he said flatly. "It's reckoning. You're cornered, Zara. There's nowhere else to run." She didn't blink. Instead, she knelt beside her son, brushed the sand from his lashes, then slowly stood. Her eyes burned, not with fear, but fury. "I never wanted to run," she said, "only to finish what they started." "Who?" Traoré asked, his voice tight. "JNIM? Al-Qaeda? The French?" She laughed, a bitter sound, dry as the wind. "Not jihadists. Not just them. They're tools, Traoré, like I was, like you might be." He narrowed his eyes. "You want the truth?" she shouted, her voice rising with fire. "It's not the fighters in the bush you should fear. It's the men in suits in Abidjan. The ones sipping Bordeaux in Paris hotels while children starve in our villages." From her sash, she pulled a memory chip, small and dark, holding it like a torch. All the names, all the money trails. Intelligence traded for bribes. Sabotage paid for by contracts. The puppet master doesn't hide in the desert. He signs oil deals inside embassies. A murmur ran through the soldiers. Traoré stepped closer. "Take the boy," she said suddenly, pushing her son forward toward the nearest soldier. "He's innocent. But you..." Her gaze pierced him. "If you really want to free Africa, stop chasing ghosts in the sand and start hunting the devils who wear flags like cloaks." And without another word, she turned and walked toward the cliff edge. "I've told you the truth," she whispered. "Now what will you do with it?" They didn't shackle her. They didn't drag her screaming. She walked into custody with the unbroken grace of someone who had ripped the veil from the world and dared it to blink. Her son was escorted to care. The memory chip, immediately secured, under layers of encryption. For 72 hours, the palace in Ouagadougou fell into a stunned silence. When President Traoré finally addressed the nation, he did not stand behind a podium. He climbed the steps of the Sankara mausoleum, surrounded not by military might, but by barefoot children and farmers, the real pulse of Burkina Faso. "Our enemies no longer wear camouflage," he said, voice deep and steady. "They wear contracts." He paused. "They send no soldiers, only silence, only influence. They sit in offices, draft grants, build schools, and then sell your sovereignty on the back page of a report." The crowd stirred. Eyes widened. "They speak our language. They promise partnership. But their smiles hide shackles." He turned, gesturing to the people behind him. "They call us unstable because we will not kneel." He lifted his fist into the wind. "We will not kneel." The crowd erupted. Cheers like thunder. Hope like fire. But later that night, in the war room, the celebration soured. Minister Koulibaly laid a new file on the president's desk, classified intercepts. Evidence that someone within Traoré's own security circle had exchanged encrypted messages with the same shadow network that backed Zara. No names, just a code name. The architect. Zara had been a sword, but someone else still held the hilt. As the city lights flickered beyond the palace, President Traoré stood in silence. He had won the battle. But the war had just reached his doorstep, and somewhere among the men he trusted, the true enemy still moved, whispering like the desert wind. He whispered to the night, "The hunt isn't over." And the darkness gave no reply.